I think surrender takes a great deal of strength. It takes strength to say, to let go and let God in and to help control your life, to say every day, I'm going to give this day over to you to do with me what you will. What is your will for me today?
Welcome to Matters of Soul Importance, where we dive deeply into topics of both earthly and eternal consequence. I'm Roxanne Solonin, faith columnist and features writer for The Forum, author, and speaker. This morning, I'm excited to talk with Monica Hannan, a fellow communicator from my state of North Dakota, but on the western, not eastern side. Along with her 45-year career as a TV journalist and anchor, Monica has authored several books, including The Dream Maker and Gift of Death. Monica obtained her undergraduate degree in history from Minnesota State University Moorhead, my alma mater, along with a master's degrees from the University of Mary and the Augustine Institute, the latter through which she obtained a master's in theology. She and her husband, Cliff Naylor, have 3 adult children. While I have yet to read Monica's book, which is still in progress, I'm very interested in the topic of surrender. In fact, Monica and I, along with another fellow North Dakota communicator, Patty Armstrong, will be speaking on surrender in a few weeks at the Maryvale Retreat Center in Valley City, North Dakota, during a retreat we will lead. Look for details in the show notes. But I wanted to broach this topic on Matters of Soul Importance because surrender is a word often misunderstood. For many, it's a scary word, a word that means giving up control. While that is indeed part of what surrender means, when properly understood in the light of faith, surrender becomes a word that can break the chains of living for self and opening us to a world beyond our imagining, with God's will at the helm. Let's see what Monica has to say about surrender through the many people she's encountered along the way in her years of interviews, along with other insights she can offer to help us approach this word not with dread, but with hope and excitement. Well, welcome, Monica, to Matters of Soul Importance. It's so great to have you with us here today. And I'm sure you're not used to being on that side of the hot seat. So thank you for your willingness to switch things a bit.
Well, I am not used to being on this side, but thank you very much for having me. And I will try very hard not to turn it around and start asking you questions. But that's what I.
All right. This could get really confusing since we both, are usually the interviewer, but sometimes on the other side. So, well, we're going to discuss a topic today that is something that's really become an important question in my life, which is what is surrender? Is surrender giving up control? Is it a scary word? Is it a good word? And so we're going to go into that. It's something I've really had to grapple with in my own life as I've advanced in my faith life and really come to understand what that means. But before we go into the good stuff, I want to get to the other good stuff, which is to introduce you properly from your perspective. So tell us a little bit about where your life began, what was your family makeup like, and your faith life.
Okay. Well, I grew up in California. I was born there in Sacramento. That's where my mother is from. My dad is from San Francisco. And I had a fairly normal childhood. I went to Catholic schools until I was in the 6th grade. We moved around a lot from town to town. And they moved us here when I was in the 6th grade, like I said, 11 years old. And I was kind of a fish out of water when I moved here. First of all, California and North Dakota were very different at that time. And but I had gone to I was really sheltered. I'd gone to a very sheltered Catholic school environment. And when I got here, I just didn't understand the culture right away. And so it was really difficult. That year was really difficult for me, learning to integrate into the North Dakota culture. But once I did, my parents really loved it here and decided to stay because they thought it was a safe environment, and it was an environment that reminded them very much of the environment that they had grown up in when California was not, they'd grown up in what they considered to be more of a small town atmosphere. Like Sacramento was more small town at that time, not a big city as it had grown to be by the time I had come around. And so they couldn't believe it when there would be kids outside at night riding their bikes up and down the street or walking themselves to school instead of having somebody take them to the bus stop, that sort of thing. So they just decided it was a safer environment. And so we stayed. And so I went to high school in North Dakota too.
And did you mention siblings? Do you have a sibling?
I have one brother who's just less than a year older than me. So, yeah.
So he was a little bit of a safety net, I'm sure, as you were traversing this new world.
He was my only friend for a long time because, we would move so frequently that, you'd move to a new place and he and I were very close and we still are. We still are.
Siblings are a wonderful thing to have. So at some point, you went off into the world and decided to pursue communications in some way. What provoked that?
Well, what's interesting about that, Roxanne, because I know that you started out thinking you were going to be in broadcasting and ended up in print. I started out in print thinking I was going to be in print and ended up in broadcasting. But when I was in I wanted to be a writer, and that was my goal. I knew right from very early on. First of all, I was hopeless at any sort of math at all, and I was just very drawn to English or anything that had to do with the written word. And so I just decided early on that I thought maybe I would either write novels, which was harder, or work for a newspaper. So I got a job at the Bismarck Tribune in high school, loved it, and just doing the really basic stuff that they let you do, and working in the sports department actually. And then I won a scholarship at Bismarck High School, and part of the scholarship came from KFYR-TV. And so I thought, well, I won the scholarship there, so maybe they'll hire me for a job. And a teacher there, Rita Kelly, suggested that perhaps she had a friend, and so she set up an interview for me. And I came in, and I was 17, and they said, well, we don't have a job for you. And I must have looked disappointed. I don't know, because I was just like, oh, well, okay. And then he said, well, come on in on Monday. We'll see what we can find. And so I came in, and that very first day my very first day, they had Lawrence Welk was coming to the airport, and nobody wanted to cover it.
Wow.
So they sent me with the photographer, and he stuck a microphone in my hand, and he said, just ask him a question. Well, I went up to him, and I introduced myself, and I stuck my hand out, I thinking it'd be very official. Stuck my hand out, and he took my hand, and he didn't let it go. I mean, he held my hand, and I couldn't get my hand back. So it was like I was pulling, and he was pulling back, and I was pulling, and he was pulling back, and he took my hand, and he tucked it into his arm, and he basically just wouldn't let go of me. And the photographer thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. So he didn't help me at all. And anyway, that was my very first day at KFYR, and I interned there for my first year in college. I went to Bismarck State, and then I quit, and I went to Moorhead. And I did get a job at the Fargo Forum, working again in the sports department. And I thought that I would go into sports writing, but I needed an internship in order to graduate from college. And so I had friends at KFYR, and I asked them to let me intern at KFYR. So they let me do that. And while I was there, they had an opening, and it paid more than the job at the Forum. So I took it, and the rest is history.
What have been some of the highlights in your career? And I know that this is spanning almost 5 decades now. That's amazing. Yeah. So I'm sure, Lawrence Welk, who else has come upon your horizon that was kind of one of those, you look back and go, wow, I interviewed that person. It was amazing.
I interviewed Barbara Bush the evening before the election of the second time her husband was, he didn't win, but I interviewed her the night before the election. That was a career highlight. I had always admired her. It wouldn't have mattered what I asked her, she was going to say the same thing. But and that was an interesting experience too, because there was a Secret Service breach during that incident. I've done some live shots where, at prison breaks and that sort of thing, that turned out to be very exciting. And also I've had an opportunity to, for instance, go to Guatemala and to spend a week there covering, in this case, it was the God's Child project there. And I had an opportunity to do some traveling, to do some stories, which I've really, really appreciated. And those things really stand out for me, because I felt like at the time I was doing some good rather than just reporting that, maybe some good was coming out of it. And, you go into this profession thinking that you're going to maybe, it's kind of it's a little bit missionary in spirit. You know what I'm saying? But hoping to make some positive change. And in that case, I definitely felt like I did. And also I've I worked almost my entire career with my husband, and so we had kind of a unique opportunity to work together, to craft stories together. And also there are a lot of weather stories that we did that really stand out. I mean, in North Dakota, you have an opportunity I can remember some pretty amazing storms that we covered.
What about this summer, the tornadoes? I was like trying to get a hold of my mom, and she's like in the basement of Plaza Tower in Bismarck. And I'm like, Mom, answer. She didn't bring her cell phone down there. So I was worried until the morning, and I found out she was okay.
You know, that I'm sure you saw it, that photo where you've got St. Mary's on one side and the apartment on the other side. My daughter was in the apartment.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
I know. I didn't find out until like an hour later. She called me. That somebody had run around, the manager had run around and knocked on doors saying, go to the parking garage. And they did go there, but it was all over by the time they even got down there. But it just tells you how vulnerable people are. That was a miracle that nobody got hurt.
Yeah, amazing, because we did have some deaths here. So yeah, a really strange beginning to summer for sure. Any other, one of the things too, and I, if there's any other highlights that pop up, please share those with us, because I know you've done probably thousands of interviews through the years and reported on even more. But I want to hear about like your faith journey in that. I know that sometimes we can get swept into the world and our careers and kind of put God on a shelf. I don't know if that happened to you or not, but it's easy to happen, especially in this business. I think I remember my first newspaper job out in Washington State, and it was pretty much it was pretty secular. And so it's a very secular environment, a lot of skeptics, also a lot of former Christians who are, it's an interesting place for a faith person to be. How did that kind of flesh out in your life? I know that's a very personal question in some ways, but that's what we're here to discuss today. So
no, I don't mind discussing it. I would have to say that I was, I think, probably fairly typical in that I was the type of Catholic who went to church, and I played by the rules, but I can't say that I was particularly involved. And I think that is fairly typical until my dad was getting older, and I was really worried about him, and he was afraid of dying, and I was so afraid for him because he was just so upset about it, and I think that there were things in his past that worried him, and he was not going to church, and I know that bothered him, and so I just thought, he's a big fan of mine, and I knew if I wrote a book that he'd read it. And so I started doing research on people who had death and dying incidents, like good death stories, and then I started down that road, and then I started finding out more about my Catholic faith through that, and then my dad died before I had a chance. The book was was close to being done, and then he died, and so we never got a chance to read it. But he had a beautiful death experience, and so then that got incorporated into the book, and I had a publicist. And she suggested that I would do better with the book, selling the book. As I was trying to actually transition my career at that point, I thought, well, what I want to do is I would really like to, go out as a speaker. And, that's really what I thought I wanted to do with the second half of my life, even though I was a little older at that point. And so I got a publicist, and she said, well, in order to do that, you really kind of have to have a little bit of credibility that you don't have. I mean, you're a journalist, but the kind of speaking that you want to do, you probably need to go back and get a degree behind your name. So I had a master's in management, but that wasn't the area that I wanted to talk about. So I went back to school to get a master's degree in theology. I thought that would give me the credibility that I needed to talk on this issue. Well, what happened then was it jump-started my faith journey. So I became so convinced in the Catholic Church at that point. And then I started going to adoration. And the two things together really ignited something in me that hadn't been there before. So I became just really, and then COVID hit, and that was the end speaking thing. And I wasn't meant to do that, apparently.
Since not everyone that's going to hear this is Catholic, can you share about adoration, which is such a gift? But pretend that you don't know anything about, or, like that you're speaking to someone that knows nothing about it. What is it like? And what was the as you went along in that, what was happening in your heart?
Okay. Well, Catholics believe that Jesus is really present in the Eucharist, so that we are able to receive him into ourselves so that we can be joined with him. It's a unique sacramental experience so that we can become one with him. But also, we can also put him. It goes all the way back to the Hebrews. It's a really unique experience because the Hebrews used to have I don't know how deeply you want me to go into this.
Yeah, do it. Go deep.
Okay. The Hebrews, they had the Holy of Holies, where they would go behind the curtain and, God was in the tabernacle until, he wasn't anymore. And then the tabernacle was empty. Well, we have God in the tabernacle in the form of the Eucharist. And every once in a while, so you go into a Catholic church and behind the altar now is the tabernacle, and if you're not Catholic, you may wonder what that is back there. There'll be it's a tabernacle, but ours, like the cathedral, for instance, is gold, and it's back there, and there are different forms of them, but they're usually very ornate, and it's what the Jews used to have in their tabernacle behind the curtain. We come out behind the curtain, and during adoration, we expose the sacrament, which is God in the Holy Eucharist, and you are able to look directly at him, and we pray to him. Now, of course, God is everywhere. You don't have to be looking at the Eucharist, but we consider it a really unique experience in that you sit there silently. As one saint put it, I look at him and he looks at me. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to say anything, but it's just a unique sharing back and forth of you're visiting a friend. You're visiting somebody that you love, and they're visiting with you. And
don't you think too, like the peace of, especially with the world as it is and so noisy, and especially you've been working in a noisy, newsroom so much. There's just so much chatter and discussion and conversation, and then all of a sudden you're in this little cave with Jesus. It's hard to describe how beautiful that is. And I'm sure it seems odd. Like I know it did the first time I went to adoration. I had to go with one of my kids who was required to go for making one of their sacraments. They're supposed to go to adoration with their parent. And so I remember initially thinking, really, is that, even though I had been Catholic my whole life, I still was kind of questioning, is that really Jesus? And then eventually I just knew that it was. And when you go in there, it's like you do feel his presence. And it's so beautiful to be so intimate and to have that focal point too. I mean, we can bring him into our hearts and we can talk to him throughout the day, and we do, and we should. But there's something about going into a space where you can just be and just be loved, really.
There's nothing's required. You don't have to do anything. It took me a while, I have to be honest. The first time I went in there, I was uncomfortable. And for me to sit, I clearly, I don't know if you would call it ADD, I was never diagnosed with anything, but I'm a fidgeter. I can't sit still. And at first that was very hard for me. It took me a while, but now I can go in there and I can just sit there. And it's a wonderful experience. I can close my eyes and just relax completely. And it's a gift. You're right. It is a total gift. And what you learn in adoration is that prayer doesn't have to be work. You can just be. It's amazing. Yeah. It's an amazing experience. It changed my life. It really did.
So talk about that. How did your life change, and how long has that been the case, would you say? Like when did that conversion moment? Obviously you were always Catholic, but there was something that was happening in your soul, and it sounds like it had a little bit to do with your father too and his dying. And I was going to ask too, even though he didn't get to see the book, did he know about it? Like, did you share?
No, he didn't know about it. Although I did have a chance to talk with him a little bit about, I asked him if he was afraid to die. He said no. We did talk a little bit about it. But when he died, I can kind of give the book away, but it's been out for a long time. When he died, he was in a coma. And so I can't really say that he came out of the coma, except that my dad was remarried. And so he wasn't in the Catholic Church because he had remarried. He had divorced my mom, and my parents were divorced, and he had remarried. But his wife couldn't go into the room because my dad was a caretaker type personality. Mm-hmm. And she couldn't go into the room. And so my brother and I were in there, and my daughter, and then they said, we're going to disconnect the tubes, and we expected him to die right away, but of course he didn't. And then they had some sort of emergency, and they had to take him. They said, well, we need the room, so we're going to move him. And of course we were appalled. It was like,
wow.
I thought that was just terrible.
Toss him out, and wow. Yeah,
so they moved him into a family room, and so we were all in this family room, and she came in because it became almost like a party atmosphere almost. It was like, we weren't celebrating so much, but we were all in there. We were relaxed. We were talking. We were talking about, and for a couple of hours, and everybody had relaxed, and she finally relaxed. And then the moment that she said, I'm really tired and I need to go home, that he stopped breathing. So he was there, and at the end he was taking care of her, and I think that he hung around long enough for her to be able to be there at his side to say goodbye, because she would have felt terrible if she hadn't been able to do that. And so, and then there was a nurse there who I swear was an angel. We hadn't seen her at any other time. There had been other nurses, and all of a sudden, at the moment of his death, this woman was there. And she came in, and she was so helpful. She was just saying, he's going, but he can still hear you. Tell him what you want to say. And so my stepmother was able to say the things that were in her heart that she hadn't been able to say, because she also was having trouble dealing with death. And so his death was beautiful and peaceful. And in the end, I don't think he was scared. I think he was comforted, and he'd had the chance to have last rites too. So, all of that was in my book. So it made a big difference, in the way the book turned out. He, had a beautiful death. And I really have to say that the Holy Spirit was there, I believe. People talk a lot about seeing others there to be with them, but I think what he was doing was he was caring for us. I think that he was trying to be strong for us the way he always had been. And, and that was what was important to him.
Where was that at, Monica?
It was in Arizona.
Okay. I have so many thoughts there. And I know this wasn't the direction that we were going to go with the topic of surrender, which, it really is surrender. But just personally, my dad had left the church for 35 years and came back and had I would say a holy death. It's interesting because kind of like the unfinished work of your book and not having had a chance to give that to him, I was just starting to write about faith for the forum. I had just come out with my first column to introduce myself. And then the next actual column was I had to tell my editor to change the end because my dad had died. It was about my dad being sick. He actually died in Bismarck at St. Alexis, but that too was 2 months in the hospital of kind of fading, and it was a holy death also. And that's such a gift. And Monsignor Richter was his final confessor, and he let my sister and I know that he was ready, which was so beautiful. So I feel like I just was right there with you as you're experiencing this, because and my thought is death can be such a time of healing. When you were talking about your family being together, like you said, it wasn't really a celebration, but I sensed like this great healing was happening, and this communion, and this, it's so important. And it can be such a blessed time, even though it's also scary. One of the thoughts I had too, as you were talking, as you were beginning to tell the story, I think some people who are not faith-based or whatever, think that we as Christians should be not scared of death, right? Because aren't we just like going to go to heaven? And why are you guys scared if there's really something like that? What would you say to that? Because I think as human beings, we're still human, right? We're still, I mean, we don't want to let go of this world. This is all we really know for sure, right? And even with faith, I think we all are going to face the moment of fear.
Oh, I think God puts that there. I mean, I think that's just part of our will to survive. That's why we survive. And if we didn't have that, we would give up very easily. You know, I mean, if you really thought that, okay, well, this is fine, but you know, what's ahead is better. It's like eating dessert first. You know, I mean, it not always be the best choice because you're here for a reason. God put you here for a reason. So he wants you to fulfill that, whatever it is. Your journey, you're here to learn or to fulfill something for you. And so if you give that up so that you can get to heaven sooner, maybe you didn't fulfill your purpose. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, no, but I experienced that with my dad. I really had some profound thoughts about the will to live that we have when I watched him slowly die, because it took a couple of months. He went into the hospital at Thanksgiving and died in January, and without his Christmas gifts being opened. But I wrote a little bit about it because it was like, wow, like this will to live. And you just kind of made sense of it for me, which is really beautiful. Like, yeah, God put that there. We're supposed to be in this world until he gives us the exit, until he says it's time. Even up to the very end, there can be so many graces as you experienced.
Right. You don't know what other people were supposed to get from that experience, but I know it was very important to me. And I think I was afraid of death before I wrote that book. And I talked to so many people who had these beautiful, profound experiences, and it really did help me. I have to say, I mean, nobody wants, I don't necessarily want to die, but I'm not afraid of it. At least not right now. Maybe if I'm truly facing it, you know, maybe it'll change, but I'm not afraid.
I also love that your love for your dad drove you to write a book. Yeah. I think that's really beautiful. Even if he never saw it, and we're just going to assume now that he knows about it, and that he's still very aware of his daughter and what you've done. So kind of, I mean, I think it's a natural like point to start talking about surrender, because that was a surrender. Has your idea of surrender changed through the years?
Well, it certainly has changed in terms of my own faith life, because I had to surrender some personal control. I wanted my life to turn out a certain way, and when it didn't, I had to face the fact that, okay, well, this is maybe the way I wanted my life to turn out wasn't the journey that I was supposed to have, and so I had to surrender and say, okay, well, this is. You know, when you make your own choices, things don't always go great, you know, so sometimes you have to surrender and say, okay, well, what do you want me to do? And you may not always agree with that either, but I have found that I am much happier turning my life over to God than when I'm trying to control it myself. Since my, I guess you could call it a reversion, since my reversion, I have gone from being a dissatisfied, kind of grumpy person to a much happier, more relaxed individual.
Well, that's beautiful. We need more of that in the world for sure. Well, I'm going to take a little break here, Monica, and then we will be back with more matters of soul importance. We're going to go deeper now into, does surrender mean giving up? Because I think that's a word that can be really scary for people. And we're going to go into what it really means. So we'll be right back.
Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
Welcome back to Matters of Soul Importance. We're talking to Monica Hannan, who is just beginning to finish a 45-year career in broadcast journalism. She's had quite a career. And in that time, God has grabbed hold of her heart in different ways through the stories she's told and just the different ways he's led her on paths to come closer to his heart. So I'm excited to have her here because we kind of are in the same stream, you could say, of our careers and also our faith. And so let's talk a little bit more about this word. We started before the break, Monica. So I want to allay people's fear of the word surrender because I think a lot of people like, what does that mean? It's scary. It's scary. And you just described your father surrendering his life, at the end. It's such a powerful moment for everyone, all the relationships, because our lives are relational. How do you recall like a transition of surrendering to God? And maybe, I know I'm still doing it. Like we have to kind of do it every day, right? I mean, because our human will doesn't want to do that. What are some of the keys in your experience to unlock, to let go? I imagine the word trust is in there too, but how do you define surrender?
Well, it's not like like surrendering to the enemy or something like that. It's like you think in a war scenario where you have to give up and surrender. I interviewed I have another book coming out here soon that deals with surrender, and one of the people that I interviewed was a cowboy, really tough guy, tough, and he said he never wanted to surrender to God because to him that surrender seemed like weakness. That was the word that he used. It just seemed weak. And it's not at all. What it is it's giving yourself to somebody who has your best interest at heart and saying, I'm giving my life over to you because you gave me my life and I want to do what you want me to do. So I am surrendering my will over to you and allowing you to work through me. That to me is what surrender has meant in my life. Or at least that's what I'm trying to do. Of course, it's a battle every single day. You have to say every day, you wake up and you say, not my will, but yours, in your morning offering. And then you hope that that's, what you can accomplish through the day. But that is what surrender has meant to me, is that starting every day, trying to do what God's will for you in that day. And sometimes it's moment to moment. That's what surrender is, because I think that definitely God has your best interests at heart and in mind, and knows so much more than you do about what's best for you.
How do you shift? How do you shift from clinging tightly to your own will, which we all have a propensity for, to letting go in that way, letting go in a way that you're releasing your will to the will of someone capable? I mean, I think probably part of the struggle would be to be able to trust, to be able to fully believe that God does have your best interest in mind. Do you have any secrets for how to sort of move through that in times of fear? I would say one of my biggest times where I realized I needed more trust was during COVID, when it felt like the world was falling apart and it felt like I didn't know where God was. I realized that my trust was not as full as I had thought it was. So there's certain times in our life where it's tested, and then what do we do?
Yeah, I went through a profound depression at one point in my life, and everything seemed very dark. And so I can think back to it's hard to remember how that felt because it's so distant from how I feel now. But I think that when you give in to that sort of thing, and that was before I'd had my reversion experience, I think just remembering that kind of darkness is, you can surrender to that too. You can surrender to that. You can give in to that sort of thing. So I think the only defense against that sort of thing is to pray, just keep praying. Just try to open yourself up to God and say, I need your help. I can't do it by myself. I need you. Help me. And he will. If you ask, he will. He's not going to force himself on you. So you have to ask. And that is what I finally did. And that's what made the difference. Because I'm a very different person now than I was then.
You're really describing spiritual warfare, which I know is a concept that some maybe would be wary over, but there really is. I mean, if we really believe in the spiritual world and we believe in light and darkness and good and evil, which we do as people of faith, we can't just believe in the good. There's also another force. And as you were describing it, I was thinking it's almost easier to surrender to the darkness in a way. It's almost the easier thing, right?
It is. And, you can tell yourself, I'm not comfortable here anymore, and there's nothing to live for, and nothing good is ever going to happen to me again. And it's amazing how those thoughts can start in a loop and just keep on going. And you need something really profound to interrupt that.
Which is prayer, right? Like that's what you're suggesting.
Prayer. Although I do have to say here that if somebody who's listening to this is feeling that way, you do need medical intervention. I do want to say that.
Yes.
I did get medical intervention, and I think it's really important to say. But because depression is also a medical condition. But prayer was a big part of that for me.
And it can be very simple. I don't know what you think, but there was a time in my life that I was in a very dark place. And I remember I didn't have a lot of eloquent words. I just said, help me. And God will answer those very raw prayers of asking for his help. He will. It might not happen immediately, but it will happen pretty soon. He is waiting. He is waiting to bestow graces on that. On us. I don't know if you have had those kinds of experiences as well, or talk to people that have.
Right. And it's trying to control everything that happens in your life. Eventually you come to the realization that no matter how hard you try, you really can't anyway. COVID taught us that, right?
Right.
So,
that was quite a experience in human, humanity, really, and how we respond to things. And it was revealing and shocking in many ways. But we have learned a little bit from it too.
Right, and surrender in the business world is important too. It's surrender in leadership. When you're a leader, that doesn't mean, to be a good leader doesn't mean that you have to come out on top. Actually, the best leaders are the people who get others to excel to the point where they no longer need you. That's a good leader. You don't necessarily have to come out number one in the game to have been a great leader.
As you were talking, I was thinking about Jesus and how he really was the model for surrender. Thinking about the cross, what a powerful moment when his friends became his enemies, a lot of them who were cheering him the day before. And now all of a sudden they're asking for his death. And he says nothing. He doesn't defend himself. He just looks to the Father. And he's going to go through a grueling death, and he knows it, and yet he still surrenders to the Father. And the beautiful thing is that he resurrects, and he comes back to life and comes back into our lives through the Holy Spirit. So that's our focal point, right? That's where we can truly learn surrender. But it is not easy. It is not easy.
No, it is not, because we just naturally we want to win.
Right. Monica, let's go back to your book. What is it called again? And then I want to hear some of the stories that, obviously we don't want you to give everything away because we want to buy the book. Let us know when it's coming out, because I know it's not out yet. And then also maybe some of the highlights.
Okay. Well, it's called Surrender to Lead. And it's got 11 stories of 11 different people who have surrendered in different ways. And it's led to different ways that they have learned to lead in their lives. So, for instance, I talked about the cowboy earlier, and where he had a particular sin in his life that he couldn't overcome, and God kept tossing him from his horse until finally he got it. And he's got a very interesting story because, when a cowboy gets tossed from his horse, and he says he gets a little dinged up. In this case, he broke his collarbone, got a concussion, had a dislocated shoulder. And still, he got back on the horse, rode back to town, took care of the horse. I mean, most people would be in traction. So it took a really, he said, getting his bell rung a couple times before he finally would listen. And he had, and I won't tell you what the profound experience was, but when he finally sat down in a chair and realized he couldn't get out of the chair, he had a profound experience. And so
I think of Saint Ignatius, I think it was, who was this big warrior and was going to conquer the world, and ended up getting some injuries and having to be, bedridden for a while, which led him to have to read some books, which led him to read some books about the saints. And I mean, it is so many times God shakes us up a bit in order to get our attention, doesn't he?
Forced humility.
Yeah. What was your, do you feel like there was a moment in your life where God was that your father's death, or what do you think was the moment where God said, hello?
Yeah, I think for me, it probably, I talk a little bit about, some of my really early experiences, but I won't go into, even as a child. But I would say probably the moment of surrender for me was actually not a moment. It was really more the slow realization that happened after my father's experience, and then the writing of the book, and the rebirth of my faith, and then realizing that I can't control my own life, and that I need God in it. And then I went from being a chronically dissatisfied person to basically a very happy person. I'm just, so my surrender is not as profound as some of these other people. That I've also one thing that came out of COVID, and I do mention this in my book, it is a very secular business that we're in, and you just don't talk about, your Catholicism or your faith. You just don't talk about it. And as I've become more involved in my faith, I've been less and less reluctant to discuss it. And now everybody around here knows that I'm proudly Catholic. And one Ash Wednesday about 2 years ago, I came into work, and 2/3 of the people that were here had ashes on their foreheads. And some of the anchors even anchored with it. And I just thought, I was so proud of that. I was so proud of them. I just thought how brave they were. And so I think one great thing that came out of this kind of wokeism that we have is that you can now wear your ashes on your forehead. You can wear, whatever religious symbolism you want, and nobody's going to say anything about it. They can't, right? Mm-hmm. That's something that has come out of that. Now, Christianity didn't win that, but other faiths won that for Christianity, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. Yeah. And I think if anything, it made us realize we have to be bold. This isn't a time to shirk away and disappear. I mean, God is calling us to something real, and we're here for a reason. He's put us in this time for a reason. I know some people would maybe rather we were in a different time, but this is where he has called us. And it's so beautiful to realize, the people that are on the earth right now, we're just going to be here for a short time, but we're all here together. So let's just love each other while we can. There's so many lessons. Are there any other stories in your book that you would want to highlight, or do you want to kind of keep those kind of tucked away?
Well, there's a one. I did interview a gal who had an accident where she fell down the stairs, and she had brain bleed in 3 separate places, and she wasn't expected to survive. And the community got together to pray for her. And not only did she survive, but she came back completely whole. And her story is pretty profound. And when she was lying there in bed, she woke up when she had a surgery to put the pieces of her head back together, because she had this swelling in her brain, and they had to take her skull off, basically. And when they were putting it back, after the swelling went down, she was in a profound pain. And she was looking at, she was really in a lot of pain and she was scared. And so she was praying, Jesus, help me, what do I do? And there was a crucifix on the wall that she could see. And she looked at the crucifix and suddenly it got bigger, and then she could see Jesus on the cross, and she could see blood coming down on his, from his, the wounds on his head. And he just said, just trust, just and, so that kind of experience that I've never had a mystical experience, but, that's, and so then she said she had to just surrender that moment. She said, surrender that moment. And she came out of that whole, which was a miracle.
Beautiful. So, going away from the book, are there any other interviews that maybe like a really difficult interview? Can you recall anything where, other than the Lawrence Welk, were there any others that were just really hard? Maybe there was a death involved or something. I don't know. Any others that pop out as difficult or beautiful, one way or the other?
You would think that over 40 years, I would have all kinds of, the truth is they all kind of fade together, but I did once interview a teen runaway it was a story on human trafficking. I so wanted to save her, it was like an anonymous interview, and she agreed to be interviewed. And no matter what I said to her, she wouldn't give up the guy that was marketing her. And she no matter what I said to her, she said that the situation at home was worse.
Right.
And she identified with the person who was trafficking her. And she was completely brainwashed. I felt really just wanted to grab her. And that was difficult. And in order to get the interview, I couldn't.
Had to be anonymous. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I wanted to tie her to the chair and call a cop.
Yeah. That reminds me a little bit of praying at the abortion facility here in Moorhead across the river, where we, a similar thing where we see people that are in distress and we're giving them help and trying to bring light, but they're just so, the fear, we're just talking about fear, right? They don't know us enough to trust that, no, there's a community waiting to help, but they only know what they know. And it's very hard. And that's where we have to surrender again to God and just say, okay, we can only do this. Maybe there was something you said, Monica, that who knows what happened. Maybe there was a little bit of hope that flickered in her heart. We don't know. And so we just have to be where we are, and God will use us. And I love how you open yourself to being used, I think, in a fuller way as your faith grew. I think I've seen that in my own husband, where he's, in a secular work environment too. And I think the more his faith grows, he's seen that there's potential for touching people's hearts and spirits, and it's very simple. We don't have to do a big thing. We don't have to make a big announcement. All we really have to do is just be ourselves and stay connected to God and let him do the heavy lifting. But we're there. He needs us. We're his hands and feet.
Right.
Do you feel like that more and more? I'm feeling that from you.
I do, because I'm on the board of directors for an organization called Tepeyac Leadership Initiative, and the whole idea there is to help form lay leaders in the community. There's a tendency among Catholics to try to let the priests do everything, when really our mandate from Jesus is for everybody to go out and evangelize, everybody to be involved, and that's how you do it. You just live your life. You live your life the best you can, and you try to influence others in how you live your life. One of the areas that you mentioned that has been really difficult in this particular job has been the abortion issue. I spent a lot of years in news management, and so it was my job to figure out how to cover things and when to cover them. And as a news manager, we have to be neutral. And I couldn't cover. I received a lot of pressure from Catholic friends on covering abortion issues and how to cover them. And we have to cover them in a neutral way. because that's our job, because we cover, our job is to cover everything in a neutral way. And of course I wanted to cover it differently. Of course I did. That hurt my heart to, every time I had to go interview somebody from Planned Parenthood, I didn't want to do those stories, but you have to. Those are the things that made this job hard, making those kinds of decisions. That's one of the reasons. That's one of the big reasons why I decided to give up being a news director. It was just too hard.
Yeah, I can see that. Especially as you grow in your faith, and I know other people too that I meet with a friend who's in a very secular work environment, and she likes to meet for coffee every once in a while just to get out of that, just to be able to be free, to be able to talk about some of the things she's experiencing. She really can't in her work life. And I just feel like it's almost like, so as you're looking forward now, you're almost retired now, you're getting close. What are your thoughts and feelings, and what are your hopes for the future?
Well, I don't really know, but I am hoping that I will be able to do, to be able to speak at events and to share my faith with other people. The book will help me to do this. Book will help me to do this, and I'm still involved, as I said, with Tepeyac Leadership. I'm on the board there, and I'll continue that. And so I'm bringing it I'm moving, so I'll bring it into a new area. That'll take a little time. And you and I are speaking at an event. And
I was going to bring that up. Are you ready? Do you have your speech prepared?
I have not prepared myself. I'm waiting for the marching orders to see how long and but I have an idea what I'm going to say. Yeah. What are you looking? I'm assuming you're looking forward to that. It is really a beautiful area. It's Maryvale Retreat Center in Valley City, and it is in amidst hills, and it's just a really refreshing area. So I'm looking forward to doing that with you in a couple of weeks with you, Patty, and I, and we're going to be talking about surrender. So I'll put the link in the show notes if you want to sign up for that. But so I guess kind of wrapping things up, let's go back to our original question. Does surrender mean giving up? I know you've already kind of answered that, but are there any other thoughts about surrender you could offer maybe to someone who's just, again, clenching their fists, holding on tightly? What sort of points could you offer as a beginning? I know you've kind of done that already, but maybe some more specific, offerings of tips, I guess. I think surrender takes a great deal of strength. It takes strength to let go and let God in, and to help control your life, to say every day, I'm going to give this day over to you to do with me what you will. What is your will for me today? Instead of trying to control yourself. It's actually much easier to try to control yourself, because then you don't have to, then you can, and then that's how you get into big trouble.
It's kind of it's kind of the first instinct, I think. And I remember what I was going to say earlier that I lost track of, and that is, I am assuming as you're talking that gratitude is a part of it. Would you say that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's it. That's your model for prayer. And the first thing you do is you thank God for everything. And then the second thing you do is you make your offering, right? I'm offering myself to you. And, I think gratitude is a huge part of it. If you're not grateful, well, how could you not be? You look around at God, especially us in our world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're amazingly blessed.
Yes, we are. And we started talking about the Eucharist and adoration, and that means, I was thinking at the time, that means Thanksgiving. Eucharist means Thanksgiving. So it all kind of comes back. Monica, I love this, and I'm excited now to see you in a couple of weeks, and we'll see how things roll once we get there. And I'm excited to share what we've learned with others, and I'm sure there'll be some sharing from the people that come to our retreat as well. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks, and thank you so much for giving of your time today. I appreciate it. Does surrender mean giving up? Our interview took an interesting turn when Monica shared about her father's death and how it became an impetus for writing a book to comfort him as he neared death. a book he never got to read. And yet, no effort led by God is done in vain. Her father's illness might have been the impetus for her hard work, and it may have seemed by some a wasted effort, since it never reached the intended recipient. But was it? Why? Or why not? In the case of my father's unexpected death, just as I was stepping into my role as faith writer for the Forum in early 2013, I would have loved to have shared the many articles I've done since his death and even this podcast. He was my first writing mentor, after all. I've been tempted in moments to be sad about this fact, but there's another part of me that says, no, he started this in you and he knows and is proud. I believe the same of Monica's father, because love is eternal and it does not end at earthly death. In fact, in many ways, it is only beginning. I can't wait for us both to be reunited with our fathers someday and to hear their responses to our efforts to bring light to this earthly veil. Which leads to what was also revealed in this discussion, that death is the ultimate surrender. It occurs to me that the more we surrender to God in life, the more prepared we'll be to take that act of final surrender, the hardest of all. Because as Monica said, God put it in us to cling to this life. He made life for us to get to know him, and we are not always entirely ready to let go. But with him near and extending his hand, we can be prepared for the final letting go. I loved Monica's insights as well as her sharing of the confluence of her broadcast career and faith. I hope you come away with some nuggets to ponder as well and join me in wishing her well as she steps into the widening plan that God has prepared for her as she retires. Monica shared later that she and her husband, journalist Cliff Naylor, will be making their new home in Virginia. Let's keep them in prayer. Check out the show notes where I've included links to Monica's first 2 books, information about our upcoming retreat, and a link to an article I wrote about discovering the Surrender Novena, a 9-day prayer that can help in learning this surrender of letting go and letting God. I hope you discover it too and the peace it can bring when we consider ourselves children resting in the arms of God. In our next episode, we'll discuss whether men should have a say in abortion, a conversation timed to drop during October, Respect Life Month. Until then, don't lose sight of the light.